This is episode 104 of the Trauma Coaching for Latter-day Saints podcast. Trauma is physical. I'm your host, Anita Bremer. I'm a Latter-day Saint mom with a history of trauma. I use my own life experiences and spiritual gifts, as well as mindset and somatic tools to help you trade ashes for beauty and end generational trauma. Let's talk about what it takes to holistically find lasting joy. Okay, just a reminder that I am not a therapist, and you should not take anything I say here on the podcast as mental or health advice. I am speaking about my own experience and the things that I am learning from kind of a logical perspective that I hope will be helpful to you. But you might consider implementing or supplementing what you hear here with actual therapy. So, something that I still didn't quite understand, even after I had started learning about the nervous system and how it worked, is that trauma is physical. Now, I kind of understood this if you've listened to episode 68 about it's a episode about trauma that I published several months ago. Um, I talked about the impala being chased by the lion and how the body, releases lots of hormones to get that body running away from the lion. So there's lots of energy running through the system. And then if the lion attacks the impala, actually gets to the impala, then it goes into a freeze response, right? Which halts the energy in the system immediately. And so that energy has to go somewhere. Where does it go? It goes into our body. But I want to get a little more specific today. It goes into the cells of our body, right? And then our bodies, our cells actually have to compensate for that extra energy, right? So, how your body copes with the energy of a frozen stress response. So, we've got the stress response kicks us into gear and then it gets halted. How your body copes with the energy of a frozen stress response can look like anxiety, depression, toxic shame, a whole host of symptoms, right? So when we are in an activated nervous system response, or we're oscillating between a shutdown response and an activation response, it takes energy. Where does that energy come from? Right? Now, I've heard coaches say, think about it. If you're super tired and then you're like walking home and then a car starts like acting like it's going to hit you, you get energy in a split second, right? So it's not just about like energy comes from food, so to speak. It does come from food, but our bodies, our brains can pull on energy sources, right? Now, I just want to say, like, the mitochondria, go back to like seventh grade or ninth grade science. The mitochondria in the cells of your body are the powerhouse of the cell, right? And what supports the mitochondria? Like, where does the mitochondria get energy, right? And also to just think about in terms of our bodies, when we eat too many calories than we use, or more calories than we use, our bodies naturally store the calories for us, right? Now, it's not totally straightforward like that, but in a very overall broad way of speaking, if we have a calorie, what's the opposite of deficit? A calorie increase, then we store those calories in the form of fat on our bodies, right? Now, our bodies are meant to do this. If we think about caveman days, the caveman, they didn't have food all the time, right? Their food was very sporadic. So when they would get food, they would eat a lot and it would be stored on their bodies. And then when they didn't have food, their bodies would pull from those storages, right? Well, this is the same thing happening today, right? When we need a burst of energy, our bodies can do that. Where does the energy come from? It comes from the cells in our bodies, right? And from the fat cells, especially. That's what fat is. It's like lots of energy, right? So part of the understanding here is knowing like what your body is supposed to do. But what if you don't have those energy stores, right? Now, most humans have some form of energy storage, but think about when we're in highly stressful situations all the time, like chronic high stress, it requires a lot of energy. This might be one reason why our bodies, instead of always going to fight or flight, will go to a shutdown, right? A shutdown response conserves energy, right? It's just like, I just want to go to sleep. I just want to close my eyes. I just want to do nothing because the threat either feels too big. We've talked about this before on the podcast. If the threat feels too big, then we just go to shutdown, right? So, let me just hop over to a little review of the nervous system, or I should really say nervous systems, plural, because when we're really looking at our bodies, there are multiple systems going on, right? So we have our brain and our spinal cord that create the kind of the main nervous system, or the root of it. And we have the part of our nerves. So that's kind of our central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. But then we have all the nerves that come off of the spinal cord that go into the periphery, right? Into our fingertips and our legs and feet and all of that. That's the peripheral nervous system, right? All of those webs of nerves going into the peripheral of our bodies. We have the somatic nervous system. That's like the big muscle groups. It's like the voluntary part of like, okay, I'm going to lift up this weight, body move, right? It's more of a conscious system. And then we have the autonomic, which is more of our subconscious, which is where we talk about the fight, flight, freeze responses, right? So that's the part of us that, dilates our pupils. We don't think to ourselves, pupils dilate, or gut digest this food, right? It just does it automatically. So there's like a variety of systems, and there's more, I'm sure, that I don't even know about because I'm not a neurobiologist. But it's helpful to understand that, because sometimes we want to make it really straightforward and it just isn't as straightforward. Just like when we go to the gym and we work out our muscles, when you work out a muscle group, we get stronger in that muscle group. If you completely ignore a muscle group, then that muscle group will atrophy or get weaker, right? The same is true of your nervous system. So if you're working certain parts of your nervous system a lot, those parts will get very robust. And the other parts that you're not working so much, like maybe the window of tolerance, which is where we really want to live most of our lives, in that calm, creative space that's sort of generally known as like rest and digest. But so many of us are used to living in the activation or the shutdown, right? The high sympathetic or the low parasympathetic. And there's like different tones to these as well, which I haven't even learned a lot about, but that like raw nerve, the like being on edge, maybe we would call it anxiety. That's like a high sympathetic nervous system state. The low down shutdown, that just like, I just don't want to move. I just want to conserve energy. I want to stay in bed, right? That's low parasympathetic. The window of tolerance is in a high parasympathetic stage, right? So, like I said, it's not totally straightforward, but it is useful to know these terminologies. And the more we live in the high parasympathetic or the high sympathetic or the low parasympathetic, the more the window of tolerance kind of atrophies, right? So it gets smaller because we're not using it. And so it becomes less accessible, right? So the very thing we want more access to becomes less accessible. Now, the main thing I want you to take away from this episode is that, first of all, that trauma is physical in your cells. And when stress happens, like certain hormones come up, and like you can actually look at it like under a microscope kind of thing. I want you to really remember that those of us who have experienced trauma and are living in those parts, like spending most of our time in the parts of our nervous system that's highly activated or very shut down, freeze response, it takes a lot of energy to oscillate between those two. And we probably are the type of people that have less energy storage, right? So not only is more energy required of us, but we have access to less energy because if we're in like a freeze response, we're not probably going to be taking care of ourselves very well, right? So the second thing I really want you to take is that in order to support ourselves physically, there's lots of fundamentals that we can practice to kind of pour into and nurture our bodies physically. Okay. Because trauma is physically stored in your body, we need to support your body physically in order to start coming out of that trauma response, in order to start finishing the stress cycle, right? So, I really want to talk about some fundamentals that you might consider. The first one is breath, intentional intentional breath, or even just good breath, good, deep, fresh breath. And I heard a mentor of mine say this, and it hit me so hard, which is that we often think first about food and water. We can go, what is it, like 2 to 3 days without water before we die? But how long can we go without breath? Only a few moments, right? Like, really, like if we're not breathing longer than 30 seconds or something, right? Depending on how long you can hold your breath, then we die. So that's why I put breath first. And when I think about the fundamental of breath, I think specifically about meditation. Now, I don't want that word to scare you away, but if we're thinking about our bodies and the toxins and like physically thinking about our bodies, breath is the thing that filters most of the toxins in our environment. We tend to go to water, but water does like 8% and breath does like 75%. I don't really know the statistics, but it's some vast majority that we don't often consider. So, if you don't practice a breathing meditation or even just 3 deep breaths throughout the day to kind of reset your body, right? Might be something that you will consider looking into. Okay, second, water, right? Because that's the second thing we need physically to remain alive. I am a pretty average size woman. So this is going to depend on your size, but I need, according to statistics and science, about 8 cups of water a day. Cups being like the actual measurement, not 8 glasses, but 8 cups of water, right? 8 ounces. And so if you're smaller than me, then you might need a little less. If you're bigger than me, a little more. It's generally your weight divided by 2 in ounces. Okay. And then a cup is 8 ounces. So divide that by 8 to figure out the number of cups. If we're not getting the right number of cups of water into our bodies, we're like a plant and we will be wilty, right? We will be dehydrated. We just won't have as much energy. I literally think of it in terms of like plants. So think about that. How much water are you getting? And if you're drinking soda or other drinks, they don't count. Okay. So it has to be water. It could be like a vitamin water or something like that, I think would be okay. And I get it. I know a lot of people just don't like the taste of water or whatever. So put lemon water. Like, what can you do to get more water through your body in a day? The third thing is sleep. And I know a lot of us struggle with sleep. I actually don't struggle with sleep all that much. I struggle with getting out of sleep more than anything. But do you feel rested in the morning? I wear an Aura ring, and I got an Aura ring because I was interested in knowing the more specific details about my sleep statistics. It's more than just time asleep. There's all different things that go into it. There's what's your resting heart rate? What's your variable heart rate? Like There's lots of things that go into it, but as a starting point to avoid overwhelm here, I would recommend that you start tracking how many hours of sleep do you get. Now, generally speaking, healthy adults need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. But I recommend, because that's not always true for everyone, some people need more, some people need far less. I recommend tracking how much sleep you get and how rested you feel. Now, I know that when my husband does not sleep very well, even though I might not totally wake up and like be consciously awake, I can tell in the morning. I can be like, oh, I don't feel very rested, even though I slept for 8 hours. How did you sleep, husband? And he'll be like, I slept like crap. I was up 3 times. So there's environmental factors here. But as a starting point, trying to at least figure out how much sleep does my body want to feel well rested. The fourth fundamental is movement. Um, there's what they call a depression threshold. So if you're getting at least 6,000 steps a day, then you're above the depression threshold. So this is your average number of steps over a long period of time, right? People with depression tend to get less than 6,000 steps. Now, we don't know if the depression comes first, and so then they don't want to move as much, or if they don't move as much, and so then they're more susceptible to depression. But we do know that there's a correlation between the amount of movement, and there seems to be this threshold. It's like 5,800 and something steps. So round up to 6,000. I highly recommend, and I have lived this over the last year. I was only getting like 2 to 3,000 steps a day, partly because I work from home. I sit in my chair a lot. I just don't really like move around a lot. And I wasn't going on walks every single day. But now my average is like 10 or 11,000 steps a day. And I'm like, how did I not get this many steps? Like, my body now is like, we need to get outside. We need to walk. So I can tell when I haven't gotten enough steps. And I've been practicing this for almost a year now. I would also include in this kind of movement a bigger fitness goal, because walking is amazing. It's one of the best forms of movement, but we also need some other types of movement, right? We need to stretch. I love yoga because it helps with strength. It helps with core. It helps with stretching. It hits a lot of the big things, but figure out the way your body likes to move and set a big fitness goal, something that you can work toward. The next fundamental is I call it the presence fundamental. It's spending at least an hour a day, either all in one chunk or broken up into smaller chunks, but intentionally spending time every day unplugged, away from a computer, away from a phone, being in nature or reading a book or whatever else that you can be doing. But our culture is really moving toward we're plugged in almost every moment of the day. And it can be very distracting. The next fundamental, I would, from like a physical, trauma is stored in your body physically, is joy. Now, I know this doesn't sound physical, but think about when you feel joy, how does your body feel? Right? It feels light and open. When you feel joy, and the same is true of any other emotion, something changes in your body, right? So if you're not doing things that bring you joy, this is something you can intentionally work toward. You can have projects or goals, or like I want to have a phone call with a different friend every day, something like that, right? You can bring that into your life intentionally. And an important part of healing from trauma is orienting toward the positive in our life, which is why I included this here. Now the next fundamental, I'm going to go into in more depth in future episodes, but one of our biggest resources is attachment, is our relationships with other people. And I've talked about that alarmed aloneness. The one of the essential factors of trauma is feeling alone. We have a physical need to be touched, to be held. And if you think about it in terms of like, if somebody's supporting you, they might be verbally supporting you, but you could also have somebody physically support you. Now, those are the fundamentals I'm going to focus on, But there's so many more. There are other things like how much sunshine are you getting on your skin? I feel supported, like physically supported when I'm near the ocean or a body of water, fresh air, going into nature, like forest bathing, right? Silence. Like some of you are going to say, like, dancing in the kitchen to music that I love is very physically supporting. And some of you are going to say, when I just have like an hour of silence, that feels amazing. The key here is what feels good in your body, right? Now, I went over several fundamentals. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I mentioned some others. And so the risk here is overwhelm. I really want to encourage you to not allow yourself to get overwhelmed, but to focus on one area at a time and to set a kind of minimum baseline, something that would just be easy that you could bring into your daily life that would help you work toward moving toward some of this support in your life. Okay. So I've got some journal questions for you here. The first one is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I with each fundamental? Breath, food, water, sleep, movement, presence. Um, I included in here a morning routine and an evening routine. I didn't talk about that in the episode, but those can be kind of anchors to the other habits, the other fundamentals, joy daily, and relationship support. And then the question is, what one area do I want to focus on and why? It's going to be so valuable for you to know your why. And then what is a minimum baseline I can implement to move toward feeling supported? Think 1 minute or less, right? So if you're going to focus on water, say, your minimum baseline could just be like, I only track my water. I don't really worry about how much water, but I just get in the habit of tracking. That can be like the bare minimum I do. Or maybe a minimum can be, I just fill up my water cup, glass, whatever, one time in the morning, right? What is the least you can do to move you forward in that fundamental? Okay, I have some things going on right now. We've got a drop in pay what you want coaching um, today, Monday, November 21st at 12:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I will drop the link to getting the info with the Zoom and all of that. If you want to join me today, you're more than welcome. And we're going to do that every Monday in November and the first 2 Mondays in December, same day and time, Mondays at 12:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. I have some fun things coming up, but I'm not going to announce them quite yet. So that's enough for now. And so are you. The impact I am making in the world grows best by word of mouth. Would you please share this episode with someone this week? And if you're ready to address your own trauma with my support, go to danitabremmer.com to schedule a free trauma assessment call. Until next time, go be yourself and follow the spirit.